All right, continuing in the Fertile Crescent, and we're moving a little more to the west to talk about Egypt, famous for the pyramids, and we're going to talk about the three different kingdoms that evolved along the Nile River. All right, first the geography, like I said, on the Nile River, and unlike the Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile River would flood annually, so it was more predictable when it would flood, and it would deposit those silt deposits. Remember that really rich, very fertile soil. And the other interesting fact about the Nile is that it flows from south to north, so it flows up. Most rivers flow from north to south, but the Nile is unique in that it flows south to north. The Nile Delta, you remember that from your Fertile Crescent map that you did. That's the triangular area of marshland formed by silt deposits. It's right to the northern part of the Nile. Okay, and here it is again. The Nile, right? And the interesting part is that it flows from south to north, so this way. And up here, you would see the delta, that little triangular shape at the top. Okay. Another part that's going to be really important to Egypt's success are the cataracts, which form kind of natural and political boundaries along the Nile. It's going to make it very hard for invaders to come in. All right, so Upper and Lower Egypt. In 3200 BCE, Egypt separated into two different kingdoms, and it was united by King Narmer. Some people think that he was called the Scorpion King, if you remember that movie. Archaeologists are still trying to figure that out, but there's some pictograms that show that maybe he was also King Scorpion. All right, the crown of Egypt that the pharaohs would wear. Okay, the crown shows the white Upper Egypt crown and red Lower Egypt crown. But Narmer combined them. Remember, he unified both the kingdoms, so combined them to be one. Or is it the scorpion? That's what the kind of dilemma is. Okay, we have three different kingdoms: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. Right, the Old Kingdom goes from 2700 to 2200 BCE, the Middle Kingdom next at 2050 to 1800 BCE, and the New Kingdom from 1550 to 1100 BCE. All right, so first let's talk about the Old Kingdom. The government was a strong central authority, very strong rulers. The pharaoh was the ruler, so he was kind of like a king, and they were dynastic rulers, which means the only way you got to be a pharaoh is if you were born into a pharaoh family, into that dynasty. The pharaohs were also believed to be a god, and they had absolute power. So they also had like a super theocracy, because it wasn't just that the pharaohs were also in charge of religion. They were the religion. They were the gods. Okay, they also had the vizier, which is like a chief minister, and they would supervise the day-to-day business, and they were head of a very large bureaucracy. Okay, questions for you to think. This is a good time to pause it. What is the benefit of having an absolute ruler? Right, so what would be good about having almost like a dictator, right? Someone who is in charge all by themselves. And what is one problem with having an absolute ruler? All right, so go ahead and you can pause it right now and get your thoughts down. All right, also still in the Old Kingdom, their achievements, the most famous ones, right? The pyramids at Giza. And these are tombs for pharaohs. So pharaohs believed, all the Egyptians believed that in order to have a good afterlife after you died, you had to kind of bring everything with you. And the pharaohs thought that if they were buried in a pyramid, then they would have a good afterlife. So they're giant tombs to these pharaohs, and because it was so important to have a good afterlife, these pharaohs would start building them right away, right when they took the throne. Okay, we also call the Old Kingdom the Pyramid Age because of this. Here's some pictures of them. Definitely want to go there one day. All right, but then the Old Kingdom started to decline. There was a lot of power struggles. The crops failed, right? If you don't have enough food, that's going to decline a civilization very quickly. And also the cost of the pyramids, right? Because the pharaohs were so set on building these pyramids right away, it really kind of crippled the economy of the Egyptians. So then we have the Middle Kingdom, right, and their government. It was a very turbulent period. A lot of corruption. A lot of the pharaohs were very corrupt. There's a lot of rebellions were common because of that. But there were some achievements in the Middle Kingdom as well. There is a large drainage project that creates even new arable land. If you don't know what arable is, it's going to be a very important word for this year. Arable basically just means, and you can write it right here, don't make fun of me, this is not that easy. Arable land means very fertile. Okay? Fertile land. And the army occupies Nubia to the south, so that's going to increase Egypt's power. And it's going to mean more opportunities for trade. Right? So because the Egyptians have contact with other civilizations, they start trading ideas and trading different goods. Alright? But just like the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom also declines. Alright? It's invaded by the Hyksos, and that's where they adopt chariots. Right? You see kind of a famous image that you would see Egyptians riding chariots, but they stole that from the Hyksos. The Hyksos adopt Egyptian customs, beliefs, and names, so they really kind of combine to be one culture. Right? There's a famous picture that you would see of an Egyptian. You notice the hat here. Alright? Your turn to think. What advancements might the Hyksos have had to be able to invade Egypt? Okay? Look back here. Yep. That should give you some clues. Alright? Give me at least 2 of those advancements that you would think would help the Hyksos invade Egypt. Alright, the culture during the Middle Kingdom. Remember, whenever we talk about the social structure of a civilization, we're always going to use a pyramid like this. Right? So you have the king and the queen, right? The royal family, the pharaohs up here. And then you have the upper class. These would be the landowners or the priests and government officials. And then the military, being part of the middle class. We also have merchants. Remember, they're the ones making lots of money. They're like business people, trading, and the artisans. And then we have the lower class, the farmers and the laborers. You notice what's not even on this pyramid would be slaves, all right? They would not even be part of the social structure because they were owned, right? They were property. Right? Egyptian social status, not as rigid as Mesopotamia. Okay, we could see that women were treated differently in Mesopotamia. They weren't able to be part of the government. It's going to be a little bit different in Egypt. Women were able to own land, had many of the same rights as men. Women were even allowed to be pharaohs. Right? Questions. Why might women in Egypt have more rights than women in Mesopotamia? All right, so take a pause, think about it, and can't wait to hear your opinion. Egyptian writing, hieroglyphics, meaning sacred carving. Okay, just like we associate cuneiform with the Sumerians, we associate hieroglyphics with the Egyptians. I'll show you some pictures of that in just a minute. All right, the pictures stand for ideas. They also would write on the papyrus, which was paper made from reeds. And the Rosetta Stone, which was found by archaeologists, helped to translate hieroglyphics. It had hieroglyphics as well as Greek, so we're able to decipher or know what those hieroglyphics mean. Right? An easy way to think about it, Rosetta Stone, right, helps you learn a language. It's a computer program. The Rosetta Stone translated hieroglyphics. Right? This is the Rosetta Stone right here. And so here we have the hieroglyphics. Right, so each symbol would stand for maybe a different letter, and we know that because we're able to decipher or translate from the Rosetta Stone. All right, some scientific developments. Of course, the Egyptians had to be really good at geometry in order to build those pyramids, which have lasted for thousands of years. They calculated the solar year. So the Mesopotamians or the Sumerians, they kind of had it wrong. They would track the moon. And the Egyptians figured out that it was important to track the sun. And that's where we get 365 days, 12 months, 30 days in a month. Right? The Egyptian medicine was also really advanced. They could set bones, they count pulse, and treat fevers. The calendar. All right, your turn to think again. In your opinion, which Egyptian achievement do you think has the most impact on our culture today? Right now to the New Kingdom, their government. Now we have new leaders, and they drive out the Hyksos, which had previously invaded Egypt, and they enslave them along with the Hebrews. Strong pharaohs, we have Hatshepsut, who was a female pharaoh. Remember I told you women had more rights in Egypt than Mesopotamia. So Hatshepsut is really famous for encouraging trade amongst the Egyptians. And we have Ramses II, who was the most powerful pharaoh. This is Hatshepsut's temple. Very likely image that you could see on the SOL. All right. In the New Kingdom, some more achievements. They have a large empire. The Egyptians keep expanding, and now they go all the way into Mesopotamia to the Euphrates River. So now they have more contact with other civilizations, so they can trade. Remember, cultural diffusion. And they had the first known peace treaty with the Hittites. But the New Kingdom also begins to decline. Power declines after the Ramses II dies. Remember, he was a really powerful pharaoh. And it leaves the Egyptians very susceptible to invasion. So the Kush invaders conquer the Nile region. They're also from the south of Egypt. All right, question for you. In ancient civilizations, how were slaves obtained? Remember, this is not about race, right? So how would somebody become a slave? All right, Egyptian religion. They were polytheistic, right? There was a sun god, god of the dead. Remember, the pharaohs were also considered to be gods. The belief in the afterlife. Because they believed that you had to be prepared to have a good afterlife, so they had to preserve the bodies, both with mummification and with the pharaohs in the pyramids. All right, here's a cool picture of a mummy. I have some more that we'll show you when we come back together as a group that I saw this summer. All right, so they would remove all the organs, dehydrate the body, and wrap the body in linen, placed in a coffin that would look like this. All right, and it was important to preserve the body because the Egyptians believed that they were taking that body with them to the afterlife. Right, they would also have maybe food or gold and those kinds of things with them as well. All right, canopic jars. This is where the organs would be stored. Okay, and we know all of these things from the Book of the Dead, where the Egyptians were able to keep a record of the dead. It's scrolls that describe the Egyptian afterlife. All right, now think. Look at the Book of the Dead, picture carefully. Here you go, now you're going to be an anthropologist. All right, what clues could the pictures give about the Egyptian afterlife? All right, that's it. We'll come back together as a group, talk about your questions, have a nice discussion, and then we'll watch a video about the Egyptians and the mummification process as well.